But yeah, no, there were points where I think Conklin showed a little bit more. I don't know, maybe it's because he's more of a traditional tight end physically, and showed a little bit more of that physicality that I think we wanted from Rudolph. I think he's a little bit. Well, I think everyone is. I think Zimmer is faster than Rudolph is, but I think he is a good sort of compromise between the physical tight end who can, come down with catches, contested catches, but also has kind of an extra gear that Rudolph didn't. I, I do think Irv Smith had a couple big games. He had a couple touchdowns, but I do, yeah, I haven't been completely sold on a lot of the hype surrounding him, to be completely honest with you. But I mean, it raises a really interesting question. It also raises the question of whether or not the Vikings should invest a draft pick in a wide receiver 3, or if they should essentially use Conklin and Irv Smith Jr. as a de facto wide receiver 3. We all talked about the Vikings potentially being able to draft the receiver out of Alabama was Devonta Smith, I think is his name, if I'm not wrong, which I think would be too good to pass up if that were the case. But as things stand now, what are your thoughts on Conklin, Irv Smith, the wide receiver 3 spot, so on and so forth, Mr. Obeli?
Well, I guess for me, losing Kyle Rudolph creates a little bit of a hole there when it comes to blocking, and blocking is going to be a continued requirement for this offensive line until they get it fixed to have someone who can do a good job there. Irv Smith is the younger of the two guys, and he has the potential. And certainly was drafted that way. So I think they got their eye on him being a very good pass catcher, and he is a good downfield blocker that I've seen in the past couple of years. But and I think I almost thought they were kind of saying goodbye to Conklin when they drafted him, Smith, because he didn't develop fast enough. But maybe there will be a good combination between the two that Conklin started coming on in his pass catching this year as well. I don't think it's all about opportunities, and some of those Kyle took up, and some of those Justin Jefferson took up. So for me, it's a wait and see to see how they take step to the next level. But this is their opportunity, and they should run with it.
Conklin's a 5th rounder, you know what I mean? And so I don't think he was ever taken to be, Rudolph was in the 2nd round. Smith was in the 2nd round. They're not looking at him to be their number 1. That's Irv Smith Jr. And that's his job to go out there and take that. And I think he's been, I think the opinion has been given here, and I'd agree with it, that he's probably that part of it. He took to it better, or about as good as they were hoping that he would. And not saying he can't still develop, but that he's not been unwilling. But we just haven't seen the mismatches. And that's what he was supposed to offer, was to get, how are you going to cover him when you've got, two guys on this guy and a guy on this guy? How are you going to cover him one-on-one? How are they going to do that? Well, it just, he had 2 touchdowns in an earlier game this year, and then 2 touchdowns in the last game of the year when, it was basically garbage time against the Lions. And so I don't really know that I count that, but if it gives him momentum, great. But yeah, I just haven't seen him be that guy yet, and or nor have I seen the Vikings really commit. And maybe that's because Rudolph was here, to working him in that way. Now, if we have more diverse attack this year, where all of a sudden he is a real threat, the way the Packers use their tight end or the Lions use theirs, I'm okay with that, because I think that he's got the skill set to do it. But there's been times games have come and gone. You're like, was he even on the field?
Yeah. I wonder if this will force the Vikings to do that. I think a lot of people had this misunderstanding of Kubiak, was labeled as this 2 tight end guru, and he did run a lot of heavy personnel, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't reflected in the stat sheets that both tight ends got significant targets at all. Going back to the 90s, I did a season-by-season audit, and really, again, a lot of heavy personnel stuff, a lot of 12 personnel stuff, but that was mainly a blocking thing or in a run blocking thing. Kubiak would default to a tight end that could block better than he could catch. So going back to the initial stereotype of Rudolph being a complete non-blocker, a lot of people thought that he would be replaced by Irv Smith Jr. because he was a better blocker, maybe not as consistent in the passing game. And that's the way it's been. So I will see if how far the apple falls from the tree in regards to Clint Kubiak and running 2 or 3 tight end sets. But it's just another question, a question mark on this offense. I mean, obviously they have the best 1-2 punch at receiver. There's maybe not that many balls to go around to begin with. But I think you nailed it, Tim, by saying, where are these mismatches? Are those mismatches predicated on maybe playing opposite a more traditional tight end and getting behind the linebackers thusly? I don't know. I guess we'll see. But I still think the team needs to find a consistent third receiver. And it is really interesting that with BC Johnson kind of fell off the face of the earth. He's another guy that after games you were wondering if he even played at times last season. And, I knocked him a little bit. I don't think he had an atrocious 2019 by any stretch of the imagination, but I just think that we got a little excited just based on the lack of productivity there. But I also think that because of the COVID cap situation, I don't necessarily think the Vikings need to invest any sort of day 1 or 2 draft pick on a receiver. You can find a veteran guy floating around for probably a steal. Wouldn't you say, Joe?
Or you can find one deep in the draft. I mean, receivers are always there's always plenty coming out of college. It seems like, certainly in the last few years now. You can also get ones that don't work out. I mean, this past year, the Vikings picked up Justin Jefferson. He was phenomenal. And they passed, some other people that have passed on him are regretting it, like the Eagles per se. But I think, if you have to go after a Devonta Smith, which, on paper sounds great, you're going to have to give him the paper, and then you're going to have, to give Justin Jefferson the paper, and you already got Adam Thielen with a lot of money. That's a lot of money invested in one position. So, I mean, I know that's stuff they figure out and work out in the wash, but I'd rather use that first round pick on a different position that has a huge need, and you can plug someone in there that you can, an offensive lineman per se, or a defensive lineman that is going to be on your team for the next 5 years and a really solid performer. I don't think as a wide receiver 3, it's just not that high. I don't think you're drafting one of those in the first round. So that's my take.
Yeah.
I would just add to that, you guys, that if Devontae Smith is there at 14, I said this in a previous show, every general manager at that point needs to be drug tested. And but if for some reason he is still there,
so we're saying again.
Yeah, you take him, because I mean, I think right away it changes everything. And you worry about the fact that, but Jefferson will be on a rookie contract for a couple more years. He'll be on a rookie contract or slotted in. You can't break the team at that point. And right away you become a matchup problem for every team. I mean, everybody should be excited about, that. And it just, if Kirk doesn't, just laser in on one guy all the time, are there enough footballs to go around? How you do that? But I think the biggest mistake people can make, or general managers can make, is drafting for a need when there's something else there. And I did a piece for Vikings Territory a couple weeks ago about Jim Finks, and here's a guy who built the Vikings into the Purple People Eaters late 60s and early 70s. And then he went to Chicago, and first of all, he helped the Cubs win their first, in 1 year, helped them win their first pennant in like 40 or 50 years. Then he went to the Bears and ultimately was responsible for putting together.
He switched sports?
Did you read the piece?
I guess I didn't pick up on that aspect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
He did. Yeah, he did. He spent 1 year before he went down to the Saints. He was out of football, and the Cubs said, will you take over our team? And he did. He became the president of the Cubs, and they won the pennant in like 84. And he had already put together 9 of the 11 guys who played on the Chicago Bears defense, and the Jimbo Covert in their offensive line, and Willie Gault and Jim McMahon. So he and Walter Payton, he'd put together all that team. So, but my point is, more than once he went through drafts and he passed on Joe Montana, and he passed on other Jim Kelly and Dan Marino in the same draft. So he went back and said, yeah.
But those are quarterbacks, Tim, though. I guess I'll just differ a little bit. Those are quarterbacks he's passing on, which can really make or break your franchise. But, as far as a Devonta Smith, would you assess the same thing there and say, pass on him? Because if we don't finally address the fact that our offensive line needs help with a blue chip player, we're just going to keep kicking that offensive line can down the road, and we'll have a flashy, I don't know. I'm just trying to say the other side of this argument.
No, and I'm not saying you're wrong in the sense of if you're asking me what's the number one need area, but what I'm saying to you is if there's a player who I think is just too good to pass up and he doesn't play offensive line, I'm taking that guy. If it's an edge rusher, if it's a receiver, I hate to say if it's a corner, but I really am saying that there are certain players in that draft that if they're still there for whatever reason, I would take them. Devonta Smith is number one on my list, and the kid from Trey Lance from North Dakota is number two.
Wow, interesting. Boy, that really sets up a heck of a pick at 14 for the Vikings.
I think it could be an edge rusher. I mean, there's a couple of edge rushers out there too that right. And you guys mentioned it earlier, talking about you need that position. I remember reading John Madden's book way back in the day, and he talked about how he and Al Davis used to argue about what do you need first. You need a franchise quarterback, so Madden would say, now you need a left tackle. You need to protect his blind side. And Davis would say, no, you need to do two things to win in this league. You need to pressure the quarterback. And to do that, you need to, A, get pressure on him, but B, you got to make him hold the football. So you need great edge rushers and great cornerbacks. And the Raiders always had those in abundance. They always drafted them and they always won. They were a very consistent winning team. Pittsburgh had a run and Miami had a run, and but the Raiders were always right there with them every year, and they built it on that philosophy. So that's kind of always stuck with me. We've got some good corners, but I'm not sure we don't need another edge rusher too. So I agree with everybody else. I mean, I would have loved to have seen them address the offensive line, but if it's like even last year's draft, I mean, I would have loved to have known what the Vikings would have done had Philadelphia taken Jefferson. What do the Vikings do?
Yeah, great question.
We don't look nearly so smart, I bet, if he's not still sitting there on the board.
Right. You end up taking the guy that the Eagles took.
Right.
Because you needed a receiver for Stephon Diggs.
You may have some people looking for jobs right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's say Smith is gone, but Trey Lance is available. Tim, what would you...
I take him.
And then what would you do?
I would sit for a year. I mean, I don't like what they did to Christian Ponder. I mean, I don't like what some Joe Burrow got thrown into it this year. They're just like, you're the guy, and I think guys come into the league more prepared to play. But if you're putting them behind a bad offensive line, and people know he's going to throw the ball all the time and everything, I'm up for failure. It's like, hey, puppy, they're hit the puppy every day and think you're gonna end up with a good dog. I mean, I just think you gotta let the puppy be a puppy for a while. But I would, and I could be 100% wrong in this, but I don't think as a general manager I could pass up Trey Lance. I would grab him.
Could I ask a quick question to Tim and Joe? Do you guys think any of these guys are going to get traded? These quarterbacks we're talking about, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Are there others? I mean, do you think they'll go to new teams? Do you think that's going to happen ultimately, or is it all just?
I think Russell Wilson won't this season because the dead cap money for Seattle is like literally $39 million, and that's just insane. But I could see it happening after that. I mean, I know they want 3 first-round picks to start, but
right. That I guess is the thing that flies in the face of it for me. As much as dissatisfied as Deshaun Watson is, who can do that? And you just end up wrecking your team by giving away three first round
But
picks.
you could look at all these franchises and say, like the Jets, what have they gotten out of their last 3 first round picks, and what would they get? I mean, the thing with Russell Wilson that makes it also untenable is the fact that he's 32. Deshaun Watson is 25, so you could arguably have him for the next 12, 13 seasons, whereas Russell Wilson is 32. So
until you do something to piss him off.
Your entire future, because by the time you get another first round pick, he'll be 36 years old, and it's like, okay, was that really worth it? Plus, Russell Wilson wants apparently some sort of quasi GM role, which I don't think a lot of teams. Why would a GM trade all of that and then also give up part of his autonomy in the process? It's just none of that makes sense. Deshaun Watson, I think, makes a lot more sense because he doesn't have all those caveats and he's younger.
And they're going to have to rebuild anyway. I mean, they trade away DeAndre Hopkins, and then they let J.J. Watt go, and Watson wants out. It seems like they might as well go into full rebuild mode and start from scratch with a bunch of draft choices. So maybe that one will happen. But
I think with Russell Wilson, I'm just interested to hear what the 12th man's all about. The first time he starts throwing some incomplete passes or some interceptions. I mean, there's a guy who had a great situation who has just completely peed all over his leg. I mean, I just don't know what he was thinking. What he felt the motivation was to do that.
Yeah.
Like Joe pointed out, his situation is almost impossible to trade. So now he's going to be back there. And if I'm a Seahawks fan, I'm like, where did that come from? We never heard any of this before. And now suddenly it's a problem. So I don't think if I was his agent or his PR guy, I'd have been like, whoa. Let's dial that back, and so I just don't know what he was thinking. And I don't know. I just think that, and we never know really, but I just, you get stuck in this thing of drafting for a need. So I probably told the story before, but forgive me. But so the Vikings years ago wanted in the worst way to take Warren Sapp. And Warren Sapp had several dust-ups down at Miami, and rumor was he'd failed his drug test, for the draft. And Denny Green was like, I don't care. I'm taking him. So the Vikings had all sorts of off-field issues, and so it comes the Vikings pick, and I met my future in-laws, or maybe I was married at the time, I can't recall, but my in-laws home, and my father-in-law's napping, right? And I'm watching the draft, and they draft Derek Alexander, this defensive end from Florida State, and I freaking start throwing things. And my poor father-in-law is like, whoa! He wakes up from his nap, like, what's happening? And I'm throwing a temper tantrum like a 5-year-old. Not since I'd seen them do this with Marcus Allen for Darren Nelson was I so unhappy. Nice. And so I waited a couple of weeks, and I said to Denny, and Denny could be very guarded, but I said, I think the only person who was more unhappy with me about passing on Warren Sapp had to have been you. And he looks at me, and he wouldn't say anything, but he just turned and walked away. And then a couple of weeks later, he walked by me. He never breaks stride. He goes, "You were right," and he just walks right by me. And it's a couple of weeks later, and I go, he's referring back to what I said about whatever.
What a great story!
So then you go to the Randy Moss year, and all day long they're building it up. He's still on the board. And I'm working at that day, and I'm like, because I loved working. I did not mind working on the NFL draft day. It's like Christmas, and I'm just like, oh my God. And everybody's going, well, the Vikings take him. I go, I promise you, he will take him, or there will be police units responding to, Winter Park, because Denny will go on a spree if they make him. And sure enough, they took Randy Moss. So my point is this: they went, for the safer pick, and Warren Sapp's in the freaking Hall of Fame. He's a terrible human being, but he's a heck of a football player.
Yeah, that's a great story, Tim. I love that. I've not heard that one.
You kind of,
I'll write about it in my painful life as a
I was going to say, that's
as a
great
Vikings
story.
fan.
Because I've never really heard it framed that way, that maybe that was a lesson learned.
100%. 100%. All these other teams were passing on Randy Moss left and right because of all the issues that he had. And I'm like going, there is no way Denny Green will let this happen twice. And I talked to him after that, and that was exactly his attitude. Because they should have listened to me 3 years ago or 2 years ago, or whatever it was. They would have had both Sapp and they would have had Randy Moss.
What year did you start covering the Vikings?
94.
Okay. Because you did some Packers stuff, which I probably shouldn't say aloud, and
No,
some
that's all right.
Cowboys stuff
That was a
too.
trip. Yeah.
That's a really, I'm always interested in this kind of stuff because we get so stuck in our little Vikings bubble that we don't have a lot of perspective on other sort of fandoms, the ferventness of them, the size of them, the differences between Vikings fans and Cowboys fans. I know you've said a Cowboys fan. I mean, how would you rank those in terms of passion, A, of those three teams? And then B, in terms of average fan, the knowledge that they have of the team or of the sport. That's a really kind of subjective qualifier, but
Yeah.
do you feel like Packers fans know their stuff more so than Vikings fans do, or are they more homer?
Well, I think for me, the one thing I thought was the funniest thing, the observation I had about Packer fans is you'd meet these people who like had 58 different pairs of Packer tennis shoes, like green and gold, and all these different hats and all these different jerseys. But you put them in the same room, they hated each other. They're like, oh, he's not a real fan. I mean, this would always be like, it's like a beauty pageant. I mean, that was hilarious. But the Cowboy fans, you could drive in your car, and if you had your AM dial, you could just sit there and punch buttons, and every station you punched on was talking about the Cowboys. It could be May, it could be July, it could be November. It didn't matter. And to come here and have one sports talk radio station and that rarely talks sports, when you're in those markets, they talk about the Cowboys year-round, all day.
Wow.
And you hear some real delusional stuff because people have way too much time on their hands. And they'll start thinking they can trade, one player to the Minnesota Vikings and get like 8 players and 7 draft picks. Oh, wait, they did.
Oh, well, it sounds like we've got someone else joining in on our broadcast here. Can you hear that, Tim?
I can. It almost sounded like aliens or something like
Yes.
that. And I was wondering if that was just me or if we've lost Joe again.
It could be. Yes, you are, but your sound is not what you would you'd hope for. So maybe we better wrap it up for this week, unless we.
Wrap it up, Joe Oberle.
I would love to ask you about, though, before we go. I would love to ask you about your Bruins and your North Star piece. I read it. I loved it. I love the fact that the insert of the video from back then, it took me right back to that time. And I think I don't know if I texted to you. I was watching the North Stars in the Stanley Cup my entire spring senior year at St. John's University, and I was in the bar every night with my buddies watching the games that they were on, and it took me right back there. I wanted to just let you to tell your thoughts on writing that piece and of that time.
Yeah. So, that night, my parents were on a trip down in Puerto Rico, and I'm sitting on the couch, and it's 6:30, and I walk over to the TV because we didn't have a remote. In those days, you got up and you turned the channel. And my brother, who's 3 years older than me, goes, what are you going to watch? And I said, I'm going to watch the North Stars. He goes, I'm not going to watch the bleeping North Stars. He goes, no way. I go, what are you going to watch? And he was going to watch like the Battle of the Network Stars at 7:00 or some trumped up, made for TV show. And I go, look, let's just watch the first period. And if they're getting killed, we'll change the channel. And then, of course, there's a fight 7 seconds into the game. There's another fight. And we're like, oh, my God, what is going on here? And went to school the next day and literally couldn't find anyone who had watched the game to talk to. And I was coming out of my skin. You wouldn't believe what happened. And then, of course, they went on that run that eventually propelled them to the Stanley Cup. And so for me, I was always taken by the story of that. And then when last year was 40 years of the Miracle on Ice, and I wrote a piece for the National Sports Center, while thinking that, I thought to myself, well, gosh, next year will be 40 years since that brawl in Boston. I'm going to write a story about that. And it was really fun to get the former players. I actually talked to 4. Bobby Smith declined to be quoted for the article. He did not want to talk about the fight. He said, if you want to get back to me anytime and talk about anything hockey, I'll happily do that. But I don't want to talk about this. And I said, I respect that. You know what? And so he said, if you want to put in this and that, I go, nope, let's just leave you out of it. If you don't want to, participate in kind of the memory of the whole thing, I go, that's fine. So, but to get those other 3 guys and get their take on it. Yeah. And they were all really cool too. I sent it to them afterwards and all 3 of them got back to me. No, actually Brad Maxwell hasn't, but the other 2 did. And both said,
Roberts, I think, was
and
one
Don Beaupre.
Yeah.
And both of them said that was fun. Love to do that again. That was great. You did a really nice job with it. So, I mean, for me, you were a senior in college. I was a senior in high school.
Yeah.
And the drinking age was 18 in Wisconsin. So we would jump in 7, 8 guys in a car and drive out to Somerset, Wisconsin. And, for $2, you could have 4 beers and watch the North Stars game, because they didn't televise the home games at that time. And they were all blacked out. But if you went to Wisconsin, you could watch them.
Right.
So we watched that whole run to the Cup, and so it was a very happy, magical time for me. And it just leads me to believe, too, that this market is so starved. And
Yes.
that year was a very warm spring, like this has started to be. And watching the Wild playing with Kaprizov, and I'm just like, man, I just would love to see the Wild make a little run and let everyone get a little excited about some spring playoff hockey.
Yes, it would. Too bad about Bobby Smith, because he was the whole catalyst there. It started with him, and it eventually had Glenn Somnar throwing punches on the sideline. But that's a great thought. I am really starting to get excited about what's happening with the Wild, and they just came off their 6-game winning streak. They got beat the other night, but hopefully they'll be back at it tonight. But that story, if you want to check it out, is on miniice.com, correct?
Yeah, and Joe ran it through Purple PTSD and VikingsTerritory as well. He was great about posting the whole thing out there. I can't thank him enough for that, and really bringing me back in this and giving me the opportunity to write that story. Otherwise, the date would have come and gone for me, and I wouldn't have had anything to do with it. So I really feel appreciative to have been able to tell that story.
Tim, I didn't realize it was. Tim,
Joe, I just can't understand a word you're saying, my friend. I'm sorry.
I'll sign us off here. Tim, I was glad, because I didn't realize it was 40th anniversary, but it took me back, and I was digging it. But you can find that on Mini Ice, and even on VikingsTerritory.com and PurplePTSD.com, the sites that promote us here. And this is on. We want to sign off to all those folks up in Detroit Lakes for KDLM Radio. Thanks for having us week to week, and thank you to Tim and Joe. And we'll be back next week, next Wednesday, with another show. And appreciate you listening to us. So until that time, I'll sign it off as Joe always likes to do. Skål.